Good evening, I'm Yochanan El Rom, and this is IBA News coming to you from Jerusalem. The government is facing increasing pressure to agree to an international commission of inquiry into Monday's raid at sea. Sources close to Prime Minister Netanyahu said the Prime Minister is adamantly opposed to such a probe on the grounds that there has been no case in recent history where the army of a democratic country involved in the deaths of civilians in an overseas operation has been subjected to such an international investigation. Diplomatic sources in Jerusalem are saying today that the government may agree to an Israeli commission of inquiry headed by a retired High Court justice with the possible participation of a U.S. observer. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman says he is in favor of such an option, but Defense Minister Ehud Barak is strongly opposed. Israel has released all 709 detainees from the flotilla incident, including those who attacked the Navy commandos. The decision, taken at a session of the Security Cabinet late yesterday, was not an easy one. Several ministers opposed the move, but Attorney General Yehuda Weinstein informed them that the decision, whether or not to prosecute suspects, was in the hands of the justice system, and he had agreed to the Prime Minister's recommendation to send the detainees home. The Ashkelon Magistrates Court today placed Sheikh Raed Salah and 3 other Israeli Arab activists under house arrest with restrictions for their participation in the Gaza-bound flotilla. The court also ruled that the 4 men would have to post bail of 150,000 shekels and would not be allowed to leave the country. Upon his release, Salah immediately accused naval commandos of attempting to kill him during the takeover of the ship. He claims that soldiers fired towards someone they thought was him. He termed IDF actions on the ship a crime and said the passengers had a right to defend themselves. The High Court of Justice today rejected a slew of petitions from left and right-wing groups focusing on the IDF action aboard the Free Gaza flotilla. 3 of the petitioners demanded information on the identities and background of the passengers. The others asked the court to overrule the decision of the Attorney General to halt the police investigation into the events on the Turkish vessel. Chief Justice Dorit Bainey said that she found no basis for interfering in the decision of the Attorney General to deport the activists. The High Court expressed support for the IDF actions on the ship, saying, quote, the soldiers were forced to respond in order to defend their lives. Last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke out publicly for the first time since Monday's drama at sea. After addressing the Israeli people in Hebrew, the Prime Minister had this statement for the rest of the world.
Israel simply cannot permit the free flow of weapons and war materials to Hamas from the sea. I would go further than that. Israel cannot permit Iran to establish a Mediterranean port a few dozen kilometers from Tel Aviv and from Jerusalem. And I go beyond that too. I say to the responsible leaders of all the nations, the international community cannot afford an Iranian port on the Mediterranean. 15 years ago, I cautioned about an Iranian development that has come to pass. People now recognize that danger. Today, I warn of this impending willingness to enable Iran to establish a naval port right next to Israel, right next to Europe. The same countries that are criticizing us today should know that they would be targeted tomorrow.
A short time ago, Turkey listed the names of its citizens who were killed during the Israeli naval intervention. The special flights from Israel carrying the dead and wounded Turkish activists who took part in the flotilla arrived in Ankara today. We get more in this report from Farah Cardelli.
Activists received a hero's welcome as they arrived on 2 flights from Israel earlier this morning. Among the thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters who flocked to Ankara's central airport were government ministers. Large crowds waved Turkish flags and chanted, "Turkey is proud of you," and "Down with Israel." As the flotilla activists deboarded the planes, the crowd erupted in applause and family members raced to the tarmac to see their loved ones. Those who were wounded in the clash were transferred by bus to Ataturk Hospital for further treatment. The planes also carried the bodies of those who were killed in the confrontation, and families grieved their losses upon receiving the coffins. Funerals for those who died were to take place in Istanbul this afternoon. 8 of the activists who were killed were Turkish, and the 9th was an American citizen of Turkish origin. In downtown Turkey, crowds gathered in front of the Israeli ambassador's residence for the third day in a row. Protesters vowed they won't leave until humanitarian aid is delivered to Gaza. Meanwhile, the Turkish ambassador to Israel, who was called home, told reporters that he spent the last 2 days ensuring the return of all Turks aboard the flotilla, including the 19 wounded and 9 dead. 2 of the wounded still remain in Israel as they are too badly injured to be moved. The Turkish parliament held a heated debate on whether or not to impose military and economic sanctions on Israel. Lawmakers refrained from endorsing the measures, apparently wanting to avoid aggravating the situation even further. They did demand, however, that Israel issue a formal apology for the raid and compensate the victims. Reporting for IBA News, Farah Cardelli.
In the aftermath of the flotilla incident, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden became the first top U.S. leader to come out in strong support of Israel's right to prevent arms from being smuggled into the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip.
I think Israel has an absolute right to deal with its security interest. I put all this back on 2 things. 1, Hamas, and 2, Israel's need to be more generous relative to the Palestinian people who are in trouble in Gaza. You can argue whether Israel should have dropped people onto that ship or not, but the truth of the matter is Israel has a right to know. They're at war with Hamas. Has a right to know whether or not arms are being smuggled in. And up to now, Charlie, what's happened? They've said, here you go. You're in the Mediterranean. This ship, if you divert slightly north, you can unload it, and we'll get the stuff into Gaza. So what's the big deal here? What's the big deal of insisting it goes straight to Gaza?
In Washington, the U.S. State Department has confirmed that the Islamic aid group, IHH, which sponsored the Turkish ship Marmara, had contacts with the Hamas terror organization. However, State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley would not confirm that IHH has ties to al-Qaeda. Crowley reaffirmed U.S. support for an investigation into the incident led by Israel and with possible international participation.
I'm not going to prejudge, how the investigation proceeds. We obviously recognize that not only does Israel have its own interest in understanding what happened, there are a wide range of countries that had citizens represented in that flotilla. They too will want to see that this is a credible, transparent, impartial investigation. We support that objective, and we'll be talking to Israel about how best to accomplish that.
The ship Rachel Corrie is still en route to the Gaza shore in an effort to breach the Israeli blockade, but a diplomatic solution is apparently being considered that would divert the vessel to the port of Ashdod and thereby eliminate the need for naval interception. We get more now on this report from IBA's Aaron Viner.
The last ship of the now disbanded Gaza Aid Flotilla is currently streaming toward the Mediterranean coast and due to arrive tomorrow or early Saturday. Rather than risk Israeli naval interception, reports today surfaced that activists aboard the Rachel Corrie coaster may accept Israel's repeated offers to avoid confrontation and instead dock in Ashdod. Behind-the-scenes messages passed between senior foreign ministry officials and European diplomats are reportedly attempting to facilitate the resolution. Cargo, claimed to be humanitarian aid for Gaza residents, will undergo a security inspection, and non-contraband items will be delivered to Gaza by Israel. 15 to 19 members of the Free Gaza movement are believed to be aboard the 1,200-ton vessel, including 6 Malaysian and 5 Irish nationals, among them the former United Nations Assistant Secretary General Dennis Holliday, who is believed to be involved in the negotiations to peacefully resolve the high seas standoff. After encountering mechanical problems, the Rachel Corrie is now on its own after lagging far behind the flotilla intercepted by Israel's Navy on Monday. The ship was named for a 23-year-old American protester of the International Solidarity Movement with Gaza, who was killed in 2003 while attempting to prevent IDF forces from demolishing a Palestinian home during the Second Intifada. A lawsuit launched by Corrie's parents against the IDF and the Defense Ministry is ongoing in a Haifa court. While the ship is privately owned and operated by the Irish arm of the Free Gaza movement, Dublin has officially cautioned Jerusalem that it will take diplomatic steps if the Rachel Corrie fails to reach its destination.
We're in constant contact with the Israeli government in relation to this matter, advising absolute restraint in relation to this particular vessel as it goes about its humanitarian purpose. The Israeli government maintained their position regarding what they regard as humanitarian aid. we are in constant contact with them and in constant contact with those who are aboard the Rachel Corrie as well.
This is Erin Viner for IBA News.
In the aftermath of the flotilla confrontation that ended with 9 protesters killed while attacking Navy commandos, what can Israel do to present a credible case of self-defense? IBA's Eli Wagalanter looks at how Israel is gathering damning evidence to support its position.
This was not a flotilla for peace, but instead was a violent and organized force. We have films and photographs which show what our soldiers faced, but the last thing that can be said about this ship is that it was a flotilla of peace. These are the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this week. But in the court of public opinion, if not in a court of law or before an international investigation, Israel must show definitive evidence of what took place to prove Netanyahu's version of how 9 protesters were killed. The IDF is now gathering and sifting through video shot by its own cameramen, as well as from the many videos shot by protesters on board and confiscated by the Navy SEALs. Here are 2 new ones released late yesterday. This first one shows that despite claims by the flotilla of being a strictly humanitarian convoy, the passengers aboard can be seen wearing bulletproof vests and distributing weapons including slingshots and hatchets in preparation for an altercation. They also carried with them night vision goggles, weapons, and large sums of cash. Indeed, each person in this group had the exact same amount of cash in his pockets. The second video shows the beginning of that altercation. As the Navy SEALs pulled up alongside the Marmara, they were met by the terrorist-affiliated protesters on the upper deck, who struck at the commandos with long poles, water cannons, and firebombs. While most of the passengers were nonviolent, this group of 40 people attacking the commandos, who had no identification papers, are members of IHH, a radical Islamist Turkish organization and the main organizer of the flotilla. Numerous reports have linked the IHH to terrorist organizations across the globe, including Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood. These combatants on the Marmara were reportedly hired to go on board expressly to provoke a confrontation.
IHH is a hardcore organization. It has been involved in all sorts of terror attacks, particularly in just before 2000 in the Los Angeles airport. There was an attempt to bring a car bomb or a truck bomb in. IHH was connected to that as well. These are hardcore people. There's an Al-Qaeda connection. And the fact that they are the ones who are largely leading this flotilla in an alliance with the International Solidarity Movement, ISM. That's Rachel Corrie. There's a boat called the Rachel Corrie that the Irish are bringing in, and the Irish government has not understood at all the kind of dangers. These are people who want to provoke violence with Israel for the Palestinian cause.
In the final analysis, it appears quite convincingly that the flotilla's true interest was not humanitarian aid, but to achieve a propaganda victory through a public confrontation with Israeli forces. The question is, can Israel convince the world of this? Eli Wagalanter, IBA News.
And a short time ago, I spoke with David Horowitz, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, and asked him if he thought Israel should agree to an international commission of inquiry into the Gaza flotilla incident.
Look, Israel should have nothing to hide from any investigation. I think the Israeli Supreme Court decision on rejecting petitions about what had happened is pretty significant. Obviously, Israel is being unfairly maligned about this operation. It has an obligation to prevent arms reaching Gaza. It had an obligation to inspect these ships, and the resistance on one of those ships was premeditated and vicious. How the investigations should proceed, what kind of format, Israel needs to weigh carefully. It should not allow itself to be, again, unfairly maligned without its voice being heard. It is certainly capable of carrying out its own investigation. There are things that need to be investigated. If to meet international criticism, it needs to give some kind of observer status or some kind of forum that satisfies international demands. It should have no reason not to do that. It's unfair that there is an international demand, but Israel should have nothing to fear from a well-observed inquiry.
One idea being floated is that Israel conduct the inquiry with a senior official from the United States as an observer. Even Avigdor Lieberman, the foreign minister, said that would be acceptable. But would that be acceptable to the rest of the world?
Well, it's not clear. Much would depend on how the Americans choose to act. If we listen to what Vice President Biden has been saying in the last day or so, it would seem that the Americans understand Israel's obligation to check for security purposes material reaching Gaza. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, which is avowedly committed to destroying Israel. Fires missiles into Israeli cities. Obviously, Israel needed to and needs to make sure that that weaponry doesn't reach the Strip. if the Americans defend that position and take stances accordingly, then perhaps that's a format that could work.
Industry and Trade Minister Benjamin Ben-Eliezer said today that from a PR standpoint, from Israel's standpoint, it was a disaster. Now, this is not the first time. It happens every time there's a significant incident here. What needs to be done to correct this situation?
I think at root, let's distinguish. First of all, let's not lose sight of the fact that Israel is being unfairly maligned here and that this is vicious and pernicious and deliberate. But Israel, it would seem to me, has underestimated its enemies in two areas. First of all, operationally, the intelligence should have been there so that the commanders would know that they were not coming down on ropes into a mild demonstration where they would be spat at, but rather that there were Hamas supporters, an organization that Ehud Barak has branded as a supporter of terrorism. Those people were on that boat. There is more information coming out about who was on the boat. And then it needed to get out its narrative as quickly and as effectively as possible. And critically, for many, many hours on Monday, the Israeli establishment, whoever it was, sat on the footage, the nauseating footage of Israeli commanders being bludgeoned within an inch of their lives on the deck of that ship. That footage, after editing for all the technical and security reasons, should have been out and about before breakfast time, Israel, when the narrative of what was happening was being cemented, and very anti-Israeli narrative it was too, around the world.
And yet, Ambassador Avi Posner said on our broadcast yesterday, once that material was distributed by the government to European countries, European news outlets, they refused to play it.
Well, as far as I've seen, it certainly has been played. It was certainly played on Sky. It was played on the BBC. I had a foreign journalist who came to me and said, I didn't believe the Israeli account of a lynch. And then when I saw that footage, I realized that I had done Israel an injustice, and I altered my coverage subsequently. So I don't think that that's what has occurred. I saw that footage being replayed. I'm pretty sure it's being replayed even on Turkish television. I was interviewed on the Turkish equivalent of this program, Turkey's English language bulletin, yesterday for a long time, and they gave me plenty of time to make the case, and they assured me that they had been broadcasting that footage.
Next Monday, the Knesset House Committee will discuss whether to lift the parliamentary immunity of Knesset member Hanin Zouabi, one of the passengers in the Free Gaza flotilla. Yesterday, Zouabi was at the center of one of the worst rows in the Knesset's history as Jewish and Arab legislators yelled insults at each other and, according to some observers, almost came to blows. Knesset Speaker Reuven Rivlin told IBA's Leah Zinder today that although he strongly opposes MK Zouabi's actions, he will continue to defend her rights as a member of Israel's parliament.
There is necessity for a dialogue between the Israeli citizens, the Palestinian Israeli citizens, and the Jewish people in the state of Israel, a Jewish democratic state. We have to breach any gap between a Jewish and democratic one. Probably those who are not in favor of Israel's existence, even though they are citizens of Israel or even members of Knesset in the Parliament of Israel, shrine of democracy, they have to understand we are democracy and we have the power to remain democracy. I'm very much worried because of this dispute, because the gap could be wider and wider and could become unbridgeable. And our necessity is to take care that the dialogue will continue, even though the differences of opinion, to say the least, are very, very deep.
And even though I imagine you shared the anger of many of the Jewish Knesset members against Knesset member Zouabi, who was a passenger on one of the Free Gaza ships, nevertheless you emerged as the great defender of the Arab minority in the Knesset.
No, I'm the defender of the Knesset, not the minority and not the majority. The majority has to understand that they cannot kick out the minority, because if we will do so, there would be no democracy. I was protecting the democracy of Israel. I understood that it is possible that a member of Knesset, Hanin Zouabi, came up the podium in order to show everyone that there is no democracy in Israel, and I try to protect the democracy, whether she has to say something that I like or she is going to express and to emphasize the idea that Israel should not exist.
Many Israelis, outraged by the world's condemnation of Israel over the Free Gaza incident, have been looking for ways to express their support for the IDF and especially for the Navy commandos who fulfill their mission despite the violent attack on them by passengers of the Turkish ship. A large group of sailing enthusiasts decided to launch their own flotilla in solidarity with the Israeli Navy. They set sail from the Eilat Marina in an array of vessels, large and small, showing placards that read, "We are with the Navy and we embrace the brave fighters in the Naval Commandos." An IDF soldier was killed in a training accident at a base in the south of the country today. His family has been notified. The commander of IDF ground forces, Major General Sammy Turgeman, suspended live fire maneuvers in the wake of that accident. This as a special team investigates the circumstances of the incident. Well, there's some good news on the energy front today. Gas and oil company shares soared on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange after the Noble Energy Company announced that its potential natural gas reserves in its offshore Tamar wells are even larger than first estimated and could total 30 trillion cubic feet. Now, that's enough gas to meet Israel's needs for the next 35 years. In other stock talk, investor confidence returned to the Tel Aviv Exchange today. Both blue chip and high-tech shares moved higher. The shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading. Let's look at the late afternoon numbers. As we head toward the weekend, IBA weather guy says we can expect slightly cooler temperatures tomorrow. Here are the highs and lows. And that's all for today. Erin Viner will be here tomorrow at our Friday time of 6 o'clock. Make plans to join her. I'm Yochanan El Rome. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening, and shalom from Jerusalem.